Chapter 16. It took a lot of self-control for Gregory not to slam the office door. It was obvious that Anastasia had filled Vivian's ears with something dreadfully awful, and now Vivian was irate with him. This was the worst turn of events since the day he had driven her over with his bicycle. He thought of her lying in the road beside him, bleeding onto the pavement, and how at the hospital he had never wanted to see her hurt again. Now she was once again injured, only this time it was emotionally. What had happened? "Vivian," he began, reaching out a hand towards her. She shrank away from him. "Vivian, tell me what is wrong. Come here, sit down on Wolf's table. The chair will be too low for me to look into your face without kneeling on the floor. What is wrong?" "You mean you don't know?" she asked, voice quavering, but reluctantly letting him help her up onto the table. She was fighting back tears, the poor, terrified thing. "I understand that Anastasia frightened you. I'm very sorry about that. She has no manners whatsoever," he said. And then cautiously added, "Are there, additional things I should be sorry about?" "Nadine saw you coming out of the theater last night with a beautiful woman on your arm," said Vivian in a small voice. "I take it that was Anastasia?" "Yes, as a matter of fact it was. But listen here," she cut him off. "How long have you been taking her to theaters?" Vivian asked, an audible quaver in her voice. "I've known Anastasia for many years, but I—" "Oh, so you have known her the entire time that I have known you?" Vivian asked, her eyes now flashing with anger. Gregory finally connected all of the dots. "Vivian, listen to me," he said, a bit more forcefully than he had intended to. "Anastasia is a longtime friend of Wolf's. He introduced us years ago on one of her visits to New Orleans. She is from Russia and is just visiting for a while. It is true that she has no manners, but she's not all bad, and there have been times when she has helped Wolf. In fact, she is putting into motion some more help for him now with a project of his. When she visits, the three of us often go to the theater. Last night, the three of us again went to the theater. I repeat, the three of us. Is this making sense to you so far?" he asked. "Stop me if I'm going too fast. Anyways, Anastasia has her head in the clouds and imagines that every man who sees her worships her, although most people are just flat-out terrified of her. She thinks it is coquettish to hang on my arm, but I told her last night that I may be spoken for. I don't know how to say it properly, but in short, that I'm not free to have crazy guests hang on my arms. We came out of the theater. Wolf ran back in because he had forgotten his gloves, and Nadine must have seen us right at that moment, with the eighth wonder of the world trying to stubbornly tear off my suit sleeve." Vivian was looking at him with more than a little doubt in her eyes. "Why did you not mention her before, or say that you had a visitor coming?" she asked. "Well, in hindsight it was rather unwise of me," admitted Gregory. "But I would say that I did not really think of it. I do not spend much time with Anastasia when she visits, on account of the fact that I cannot really stand her. She came to New Orleans 3 or 4 weeks ago, then left to travel somewhere else, I forget where to, and she has now returned, prior to her return to the old country. Personally, I would stuff her on the next barge and push her out to sea, but as I said, she is helping Wolf with something that is important to him, so I'm obligated to wait for her to push back out to sea on her own. As I understand it, that should be in a matter of days." Vivian still looked miserable. "What is she helping Mr. Gerstner with?" she asked doubtfully. Gregory looked at Vivian and sighed. Damn everything. Why did she always have to ask him questions that he could not answer for her? Something to do with books, he told her curtly. She looked unimpressed. Honestly, you know Wolf hardly even cares about anything else. And now hear my side of it all, he continued. I felt lousy last night and wanted to stay home and write. Instead, I was forced to attend a theater performance I didn't enjoy, with someone I dislike, and then today, when I went to visit you, to cheer myself up, you were not at home, and when I came back to the store, I discovered that this rude woman was bothering you and frightening you. Oh yes, and now, the final straw is that you are angry with me because you believe I have been unfaithful to you. I need a time machine so that I can set everything back for the last 24 hours and start this whole day over again. Vivian was only half listening to him, he could see. That woman just told me that you often sit in the theater with several beautiful ladies in there with you on any given night. Is this true? Well, yes it is, he said, suddenly angry. Or rather it was. So what if I took beautiful ladies to my loge? It was before I knew you, and some of them weren't even ladies. No, I didn't touch any of them, at least not these. It sure isn't easy for a man to walk a straight enough narrow line to please you, I must say. You want me both pure as the driven snow, and also full of lusty desires, but you cannot have it both ways. He threw his hat, that he was somehow still holding, across the small room in anger, and it hit the opposite wall with a dull sound before falling behind Wolf's filing cabinets. Vivian burst into tears, hiding her face in her hands. For a moment there was silence, and then Vivian looked up and continued, in a weak, uncertain voice. She also said I reminded her of a pet bunny. Is that all I am to you? A pet bunny? Her tears slid miserably down her cheeks. His anger left him as quickly as it had come. Leave it to Anastasia to put everything in the most distasteful light possible. His heart convulsed in his chest for Vivian. The poor thing. My God, Vivi, how could you think that? You mean the world to me. Have I ever treated you as if this was my view, that you are just some trifling game to me? Have I ever been lacking in my decent intent or respect towards you in any way? Have I ever played you false? Have I ever mistreated you or given you any reason to doubt that I care tremendously for you? I know how it must look to you, and I know that you have lived through something dreadful today on account of all of this, and I am so sorry that you have suffered. Vivi, look at me. She refused to meet his eyes. Please look at me, he pleaded. She moved her hands away from her face where she had been wiping at her tears, and at last looked up at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed and tired. Clearly this was not the first time today that she had cried. He took her small hands in his and kissed the wet tears on them. They smelled wonderfully like her. Dear one, I have many flaws, but faithlessness is not one of them. If anything, I cling on too long, past reason, once everyone else has tired of it all, and I still hold out hope for a reconciliation. I'm older than you, and there is much about me that I want to explain to you one day, but I cannot explain it to you yet. I can tell you that I have loved others before you, but no one since. I honestly cannot well recall my earlier loves, and sometimes I now wonder if their only purpose was for me to become better at loving you once you came into my life. I spent many lonely years, as you know, and I wanted to believe that one day I would meet someone like you. But at the same time, I found faith very difficult. I could always readily see the gloom in everything, and it was easier for me to believe that nothing good would ever happen to me again. Yes, I spent many evenings at the theater with lovely women, embracing them, enjoying their company, even kissing their bare shoulders sometimes, but I always went home alone. I never went home with any of them, and I took care not to invite the same woman to the theater more than a few times, lest she mistake my desperation for companionship for a true desire for any specific woman. Vivian looked at him skeptically. "You never went home with any of them?" she asked. Gregory blushed. What kind of assurance exactly did she think she needed here? "Vivian, I'm not going to lie to you. Yes, I have lain with other women, but that was so long ago that I cannot even remember what it was like. But I swear to you that in these years prior to meeting you, there has been no one." He looked at her. God, but she was innocent. She was innocent enough to hear this and interpret it as good news. Oh, Vivian, my love. And most importantly, he added, if anyone would try to tell you now that I have been untrue to you, do not believe them. You can rely on me to always be loyal to you. She was fighting a hard internal struggle he could see. She bit her lower lip and thought, looking as unhappy as possible. "Vivian, dearest, what can I do for you to make you feel better right now? I don't know what to do. I'm not sure if you would like me to leave you alone or to hold you close," he said with a sigh. "If you loved me, you would know," she replied miserably, sniffing hard, the tears about to come again. He looked at her and thought about it for only a moment before stepping closer, scooping her up, and gathering her in his arms. She burst into tears against his suit jacket, covering him with hot dampness. Her scent in the small, enclosed room had some time ago already started to drive him wild, and now to also hold her against him took him in that one stride, right back to the night that she had shown up drunk at his apartment. There, he told her, pressing his cheek against her hair and fighting to think of holiness. Outside, he could hear Wolf's footsteps approaching the door, followed by a polite knock. "Excuse me, but are you two done with my office yet? I have work to do in there." "Sadly, no," replied Gregory, holding Vivian in his arms even tighter. She was light as a feather. He could hold her like this all day. He heard Wolf sigh out loud and walk away again. Vivian kept crying quietly against his chest. After a while, he set her down again, put a hand into his pocket, and pulled out his white pocket handkerchief, embroidered with its white M. "Here, use this," he said, pressing it into her hand. She took it and ungracefully blew her nose into it, which made him smile. I take it that you do not want it back right now?" she asked, looking up at him through her tear-soaked eyelashes. No, not in that state. Actually, keep it all together. I'm getting the impression that you cry more than I do these days, he replied gently. Pick me up again, she said, and he dutifully lifted her once more in his arms, with her legs dangling over his arm. She twined her arms around behind his hair and placed her head against the side of his neck, curling herself up against him. How readily she now found her way around his body was more than a bit frightening to him. No one had been this way with him in years, maybe ever. It was like she was at home here. Gregory, she said against his throat. The sound moved through his neck and ran down the length of his spine until his whole body thrummed with it. There was no denying it. There was always temptation for him with her. But between the fragments of temptation lay a kind of paradise. For a perfect moment he held her, letting the world drop away from them. This would not have happened if you told me more things, she said after a while. I want to know more about you, so that I can feel closer to you, she said, her mouth still against his neck. Closer than we are right now, dear one, he murmured into her hair. That will be difficult, he jested. But inwardly his heart sank, because he knew what she meant. Yes, closer, she replied stubbornly, pulling him tighter. Promise me you will tell me more things from now on. And tell me that you love me. You have never yet told me in direct and simple words that you love me. He felt his heart plummet into his socks. So she had noticed that. Dearest, he said softly to her, as you are extracting these promises and vows from me, please recall that I am entirely innocent, and that these are not any kind of tributes for transgression. I did not commit any transgression. Moreover, do you really want me to profess my love for you right now, in the immediate aftermath of this unpleasantness? Or shall I wait for my own good time, beloved? She heard him call her beloved and smiled anyways, through her drying tears. Then she nodded her agreement. But you do need to tell me things more often, she repeated. Yes, thought Gregory, I do. This whole thing is getting extremely complicated. I thought that I needed to protect you by keeping things from you, but I failed to appreciate that by not telling you something, it can also hurt you. I have a few things I can tell you right now, he said. But first, let's give Wolf his office back, all right? He gave her one last squeeze and set her down beside him. Her face looked crestfallen, as it usually did when she had to let go of him. It is with reluctance that I let you go too, you know, he told her tenderly in her ear, making her blush. He walked over to the door and opened it. Wolf, we have finished in here, he called into the store. Has the Russian wonder vacated the premises? She has gone, said Wolf, stepping into his office and looking about as if wondering if they had been at his papers or made a mess of things. Good, said Gregory. Vivian, I may as well tell you that Anastasia is very dangerous, and if you see her again, do not run, but get far away from her as quickly as you can. Wolf, I need to take another hour to escort Mademoiselle Prevet home. Be my guest, replied Wolf. I'm just glad to have admission to my own office again. Let us be on our way. Say, has anyone seen my hat? Inquired Gregory, looking up and down the counter. You threw it behind the filing cabinets, said Vivian in a small voice, as if reluctant to remind him of it. Oh, so I did. Pardon me, Wolf, one more thing out of your office, then, said Gregory. He fetched his hat and ushered Vivian out of the store, and together they made their way through the streets of New Orleans. When they came upon a bench, Gregory insisted they stop and sit for a while, so that he could make good on his promise to share some more information with her. I do want to tell you more things, Vivi. So here, let me look in my notebook and see what the upcoming items are that I should tell you about. Oh yes, here is an important one. Wolf will be traveling in May, so I will be running the store alone for a few weeks. And then in June, I will be traveling to Europe with Wolf to help him with another book project of his. And another thing here. Before all this happened, I actually went to your apartment today with good news. I wanted to invite you to a gay 90s ball just after Easter in a few weeks' time at the the Roosevelt Hotel. Would you like to come? So you will be going away? Vivian asked. It was uncanny how she had zeroed in on the one piece of information that he had worried would cause her discomfort. He now realized that her inevitable disappointment was a key reason behind his not having mentioned it to her earlier. He hated to disappoint her in any way. It will only be for a few months, he said. I will be back in August. Time will go quickly. A few months? There are only a few months between now and your leaving, she said dejectedly. Time will go quickly. He looked at her and saw how bruised she was by her recent hurt, and that softened his heart. Time always seems to go quickly when I am with you. But then there are also moments when time stops for us. Haven't you felt it also? She looked over at him for a moment, and then nodded. Will you come and help me at the store while I am alone there? He asked her. Knowing your way around a needle and thread as you do, you might actually be of some use, sewing up torn book bindings and such. Vivian frowned. I hope I will not have to assist with the actual book repair work. Mr. Gerstner's reputation might suffer permanently as a result. Gregory laughed. No need to worry. I already told him as much also. We agreed that I would take new orders, but that, other than tipping in a missing page here or repairing a torn page there, I would not be undertaking any other more ambitious book repair projects. But forget book repairs for the moment. Will you let me take you to this historical costume ball? Vivian looked down at the bench. I have never been to a ball. I confess, I would have nothing to wear to such an occasion. Also, you should know that I do not know how to dance. Do not know how to dance? He asked her. After the accident, I put in prayers to the Almighty for you to be able to dance. How else will I know if my prayers have been truly answered unless you go with me and let me twirl you around the floor in graceful pirouettes? You flatter me, but I may just be a lousy dancer, and then you might be sorry you had wasted a prayer on me, she said glumly. Well, he replied, I can try to teach you a few steps. And if you step on my foot, you are so light, how much could that possibly hurt me? No doubt less than when you trod on my foot, she replied with a grimace. You will never let me live that down, will you? He asked her with a smile. Probably not, she said, grinning back at him. But we still have not solved the dilemma of what I would wear. Perhaps the good fairies might bring me something. When I was a little girl, my mother told me a story about a girl who pulled a magic dress from a walnut shell. That must have been an obscenely small dress, then, Gregory laughed. In this case, I was definitely thinking of something with a little more material. Apparently there are historic costumes for loan in the city, and I was thinking to bring a dress for you for the occasion. Vivian gave him a skeptical look. My mother is unlikely to approve. Moreover, how would you know which dress to get me? That is simple. You will wear whatever I select for you, he said, his eyes half closing as he briefly enjoyed feeling smug. I'm not sure. I may be better off just shelling walnuts and hoping to find a dress inside, said Vivian, looking out into the street. What would you wear? White gloves, white tie, and a tailcoat with historic buttons. Would that suit your desires? He asked her playfully. She looked back at him, and he could see in her beautiful gray-green eyes that she had already imagined it, and that the image was not unpleasant to her. She was going to reply yes, which made him smile from the inside out. Well, I suppose, she said slowly, toying with him. You couldn't wear anything more formal, then, she added, clearly being sarcastic. I think I have a top hat somewhere that I could dust off. One would be hard-pressed to find anything more formal than that, he told her. She looked at him and laughed. As tall as you already are, in a top hat you must be 6.5 feet tall. That alone would probably be worth seeing. All right, I agree. Bring the dress of your choice, and we can go to this ball, assuming my mother will give her approval. Oh, she will, because I'm planning to ask her to come as your chaperone. This is a historic ball, down to the last nuance, and there will be seating with refreshments for the chaperones. Chaperones do not have to come in historic costume, I should add, and it might be a good idea for your mother to bring a book, in case the evening drags on. But not to worry, we will get you home so you are in your bed by the stroke of midnight. What kind of a ball is that, with my mother there, and then with me having to leave before midnight? Scowled Vivian. The kind of ball that is suitable for when you are 17 years old, he replied firmly. Now, no more complaining about it. I want you dressed up like a princess, and on my arm, so that every young man within sight distance can see you and be wildly jealous of me. The mere thought of it made him smile widely, and he reached a hand over to brush a ladybug from her skirt. We should be happier more of the time. Don't you agree, Vivi? What kind of memories will you have when you are older? Of me sitting there next to you on your mother's sofa, impatiently watching you sew? Youth is for dancing. Vivian looked over at him. And what kind of memories will you have when you are older? She asked him. His breath caught and he looked away. Me? Why, I don't know. My memory has so many problems with it already. I may just have none at all. Let's worry about it. Let us instead put our attention to making your memories as good as possible. Then you can tell me how it all was, and I can smile with you and believe you and think how wonderful it all must have been. They stood up and walked on, with Vivian looking calmer and happier, but with Gregory thinking of how fragile a thing her trust in him was, and how deep of a scar even a minor misunderstanding could cause. Today, an embrace and the invitation to a ball was enough to soothe her heart. But what about in the future? Wolf had been right. She would demand the answers to questions that Gregory could not answer. And then what would Gregory do? It was a question without an answer to it. His only hope was that that day was still far from now. Teaching Vivian to dance was not a very difficult task, and furthermore to Gregory it was also very pleasurable. He loved any excuse to have her close, and she was naturally graceful and very quick to learn new things, making Gregory feel an ache in his heart all over again that she had been denied more schooling. Oh, the things that she might have done with a more expansive education. She was too smart for sewing, but the fates did not hand out good fortune in this life merely on the basis of merit, he well knew. If merit had anything to do with it, he would probably be a chimney sweep, while Vivian was a high-born lady. Would she care for him then? He wondered. In his imagination he could see his trembling, soot-stained fingers approaching the shining glory of her pale, bare arm. "Gregory, am I even doing this right?" Vivian called to him. It was a warm, sunny day, and they were in a meadow in Audubon Park, where he had brought out his portable gramophone, wound the hand crank, and put the needle carefully on a recording of Strauss waltzes, which he had on occasion listened to with Wolf, when Wolf came to call on Gregory at his apartment. They were schmaltz, but they were also Austrian, so Wolf could make no legitimate complaint. Gregory looked over at Vivian, and thought for the 100th time that there was nothing he could teach this beautiful, slender, fairy-like creature, with her silverish blue, light brown hair shimmering in the warm sun, her slender, firm arms reaching into the air like orchid stems. He thought that he could happily spend infinity sitting beneath this tree and watching her, but she was impatient for him to come back to her, so he stood up and walked closer. A Viennese waltz is that perfect blend of something formal and regal with something playful and flirtatious, he told her. This is the emperor and empress on their evening off, drinking champagne and letting the empire take care of itself for a few hours. Here, give me your arms and let me lead you. He caught her about her slender waist, and they whirled over the grass, inasmuch as it was possible to pirouette on grass. A butterfly flew in to join them, and it spun with them for a bit, tickling his memory and pushing his mind to try to recall another moment with another butterfly, but he could not bring the time or place fully to mind. "Perhaps we should take a rest. I'm feeling dizzy," said Vivian after a while, stumbling closer to him. "And the dizziness is why I also need to teach you to do this turn in reverse," explained Gregory. "Although perhaps I shouldn't, since it is somewhat pleasant to have you fall forward like that, so that I can catch you against me." He grinned. "It will be less pleasant when my lunch comes back up," retorted Vivian, ever practical. "Right, so here is the reverse turn then," said Gregory, and he walked her through the motions needed to reverse the Viennese waltz. "What will we do if they play anything other than a waltz?" she asked him. "So far you have not taught me any other dances." "I cannot teach you everything in one afternoon," he replied. "For the other dances, we will visit with your mother, or I will fetch you sweet pastries to eat. Let me play this waltz again, and then we can rest on the grass. I have a few more records for you to listen to, if you would care to hear them." They danced on until she was able to execute waltz turns smoothly in both directions, and then he rolled out his old gray blanket that he had brought. She pulled her sweater down from off of the tree branch where she had hung it earlier, and she sat down on it and stretched her legs out in front of her, her skirt gathering around her in graceful folds. "What will you play me first?" she asked. "Well, here is a good one," he said, pulling the Strauss record off and taking out another record. "This one is a famous piece by Franz Schubert, known as the Trout. Together with Mendelssohn, it was one of the pieces my mother often played on the piano. It is about a fish." He put the needle down on the black, shiny, shellac surface, and the sweet strains of Schubert drifted out of the gramophone and into the spring breeze. Here was a piece that he could hear any number of times, and it still made him feel like that small boy hiding under the card table in the music room and hoping no one found him and made him go to bed. He saw Vivian close her eyes and listen intently. And he loved her in that moment for the deep attentiveness to the things that he brought to her with a desire to share them with her. He wanted to pull her resting head into his lap, but didn't dare. Instead, he tried to imagine being inside her head, hearing this music for perhaps the first time, being carried away like the fish on that bright and bubbly river of sound. "That is a beautiful piece," she said to him when it had finished, and she opened her eyes. "It makes me wish I knew how to play a musical instrument." "I could play some piano once," he told her, "but because I was always holding myself to my mother's standards, and she was a brilliant pianist, I got quite discouraged. Now what I play best is records. Here is another piece. This one, the most famous aria from the Opera Turandot, called Nessun Dorma, as recorded by the great Spanish tenor Antonio Cortis. But I have to warn you, this is the most impassioned aria that any man has ever sung about the woman he loves." "What is the opera about?" Vivian asked him, sitting up and leaning back on her arms and letting the sun warm her face. "It is about a man who falls in love with a cruel and cold-blooded Oriental princess. He wins her hand by cleverness, but then, realizing that he cannot win her heart like this, he puts himself at her mercy by divulging to her his true name. In the final act, she has the opportunity to have him killed, but he accepts his potential fate so bravely that she finds that the love in her has come to outweigh her earlier hatred. And they marry," Gregory explained. It all sounds quite far-fetched," replied Vivian, her eyes still closed. "Opera plots are often far-fetched, but that is of little matter, since the emotions are what is real," he told her. "Are your ears ready, my little one? There are times when this piece is exactly
what the music inside my heart feels like. He put the needle carefully down into the groove at the edge of the record. He closed his eyes and waited. In a few moments, the dark strains of Nessun Dorma began to swirl around them, entirely incongruous with the sunshine and the afternoon park further beyond. This was what longing sounds like, his heart told him. How many times have you heard this aria in the theater, on this record? He moved closer to Vivian and let the sound pour into his ears. This is desire. This is what it sounds like to love someone until your whole heart hurts with it, he thought. It felt as if his fingers were touching her skin, every sensation of it genuine and authentic. Only the motion itself was missing. He felt each familiar note as Antonio Cortis sang, felt the music rising to a crescendo, felt it pulling his soul out of his chest as the notes climbed higher and then finally soared like some kind of a glorious bird, both undefeatable and on fire. A phoenix, perhaps. Here was the sound of giving one's entire heart and being to another, without caution and without holding anything back, saying, "Do with me as you wish. My heart is already your prisoner." The aria ended, all flame and glory, and he looked over at Vivian, who had opened her eyes. "Principessa," he said to her in a low voice, quoting from the aria and unable to restrain himself. "That was beyond any words," she said to him. Then she closed her eyes once more. "Play it again," she instructed him in a low voice. He cranked the gramophone, put the needle back at the start of the record, and let the lush music flow again. This time, he watched her face, seeing in her unguarded expression the traces of every minute sensation. Crescendo after crescendo, watching her the way that a man, overcome with desire, might watch the face of his lover in the most intimate moments imaginable, trying to gauge her feelings and her satisfaction with his sensual ministrations. So now Gregory tried to go to where she was, to make himself hear this music with her ears, and to let its magical longing overtake him, as it once had for the first time. for the second time, and she opened her eyes. The look she gave him made it difficult to believe that she was only 17, and that they were both fully clothed and in a public park. "You certainly do not need me to teach you the language of longing," he thought ruefully. "Will you play it once more?" she asked him boldly. She did not even blush. Her mouth was slightly open in a way that only a saint could resist kissing. He could not help but smile at her. "I am sorry. 2 times is the sure limit for someone of your age and innocence. When you are older, you can listen to it as often as you would like, while sipping sherry daintily from a cordial glass and reminiscing about your youthful transgressions." She lay down on her back on the blanket and stared up at the sky. "If my mother has anything to say about it, I will never have the chance to have any youthful transgressions. I'm not sure what Nessun Dorma means, but I'm assuming it means no chaperone. He is singing about how much he wishes they could be rid of her chaperone, a cruel and cold-blooded Oriental matron who is making their life unbearable. At the end of the opera, they finally discover a way to be forever together without any further interference, which lets them live happily ever after." Gregory laughed out loud. "I had no idea that you were so imaginative, Mademoiselle Vivian. Who knows? That may have been the original libretto that Puccini was working with, but then someone talked him out of it. It certainly has a ring of truth to it. It is an over-the-top kind of opera, without a doubt." "But you love it," she said to him. "I know all about you, Mr. Morgan. You and your love of the high-blown and dramatic." "You know all about me, eh? Is that so? Well, we will see how well you know me. I may have an idea to put your knowledge of me to the test. It is a game that I have in mind for another day. But for now, shifting moods a bit, I have one final piece for your delicate ears to savor. Would you be all right to hear one more piece?" She nodded. "If it is anything like the last one, I may need to fan myself lest I combust," she joked. "No, this one is something altogether different. It is one of my newest records, a recording of the conductor Leopold Stokowski. It is called Gymnopédie 1, and it is by Erik Satie, a Frenchman with a romantically melancholy sound. He drank himself to death incidentally over a woman. It is magical and atmospheric, and sounds like this day, watching the clouds, full of sweetness, if a touch sad. Here, take a listen." He cranked the gramophone again and put on the final record of the afternoon. The tenderness and calm in this music, with its rippling notes, was like the music that the breeze would write to the reeds if it was going to compose notes. He gave in to his longing to lie down a handbreadth's distance from her, closed his eyes, and they both drifted like Tristan in his boat, letting magic pull them with sure direction across the sea, taking them both to that place where every contentment was theirs. It was an unforgettable moment with her. But lest he forget it, he wrote it down in his journal later, capturing the enchantment forever. is somewhere far away. My body is lying on this blanket next to you in the sunshine. And we are listening to Erik Satie's Gymnopédie 1, he wrote. Your small, child-sized person is so close to me that there is only a thin layer of sun-warmed air between us. Your hair is almost touching the side of my face. I have the feeling of seeping into your body bit by bit, like a spill of water being sucked into a nearby towel. You squirm a bit like it tickles you as this absorption is happening, as if you can feel it too. I say nothing. You say nothing. But we are in full, wide spectrum, back and forth conversation the entire time. The silence is deafening. The clouds drift slowly. Time elongates and drips. There is no one anywhere in the whole world except for us. You and me and these clouds. The entire purpose of the existence of the earth is to provide this cool, soft cushion of grass for our bodies to recline on while we are just there together. I love you so much in this moment, and am holding you infinitely close, although my hands are resting at my sides, and yours are lying seemingly empty beside you. This is the illusion, my love. Only the heart can see what is real here. In the days between his visits with her, Gregory started to take more notes of things he could tell her, interesting things he wanted to share with her, thoughts he had had, or things he wanted her opinion on. He wrote these all down in his pocket notebook, and then, when he was next alone with her, he would open his notebook and share them with her item by item. She loved it. It served to give her the feeling that he was ready to involve her more in his world. It also let him believe that he was making the best possible use out of each precious moment that he had with her, knowing that these moments would almost certainly be finite, and he did not want to waste a single opportunity to give more to her and to somehow magnify her happiness, if it was at all in his power. On the Wednesday afternoon just before the Saturday of the historic costume ball, he came to visit her and her mother with a small bag in his hands. "What is inside?" Vivian asked him curiously. "It is a game," he told her. "Oh, how is it played?" asked her mother, setting down her sewing and drawing nearer. "We can sit down at the dining table and I will show you. Here, come sit across from me," he said. Vivian turned off the radio, and then her and her mother came to sit down across from him. "You are a master of intrigue, Mr. Morgan," said Madame Prevet. "I'm waiting for you to pull live poultry out of this bag, perhaps, or some other such completely unexpected thing." "No, I have not smuggled a live chicken in here, although that would have made for a memorable afternoon," agreed Gregory. "There are a few small items in here, but before I begin, do you know how, in Far Asia, the high holy men of the Buddhist faith are selected to their office? The lamas, they are called." Vivian shook her head. Madame Prevet also did not know, so Gregory proceeded to tell them. when the dying lama is ready to leave this world, or upon his death, the monks who serve him read all of the portents and then go out into the countryside to search for a successor, a small male child into whom the spirit of the last lama is believed to have transferred itself through reincarnation. This is already very interesting, but even more interesting, I think, is how the small child is identified. One thing that happens is that the monks bring several of the items belonging to the most recent lama, and they mix these items with items that did not belong to the lama. The child, as the reincarnation of the lama's spirit, is asked to identify which items belong to him. Him, the child, in his previous incarnation as the last lama. If the child chooses the correct items, then that child is named by the monks to be the reincarnation, and he is trained by the monks to serve as the next lama. This is exceedingly unusual, Mr. Morgan. Do you mean to say that your bag is full of items from some Oriental holy man? Asked Madame Prevet. No, Madame. For better or for worse, my bag is full of boring, small, everyday kinds of items. Now, recently, Mademoiselle Vivian mentioned to me that she thought she knew my personality rather well, and so I have brought a mix of items, some of which are mine, and some of which are not. I will place them on the table here between us, and she will separate out the items that are mine from those that are not. There are 12 items, 5 of which are mine. The rest belong to others. Mademoiselle, are you ready? Vivian gaped at him. Do you mean to say... surely there can be no way that I can know. And what if I guess incorrectly? Gregory laughed. Then it will be all that much more lively of a game. Take your time and look over all of the items. You may pick them up for closer observation. He opened the bag and reached a hand inside. Then he looked across the table and smiled. Oh, Mr. Morgan, you are too much. Wherever do you get these ideas? Asked Madame Prevet. Show us these items already. We are on edge with excitement. Very well, said Gregory, and he tipped the contents of the bag onto the table in an unceremonious pile. There was a gentleman's ring, a pair of cufflinks, a pen, an old button, a guitar pick, an old worn leather belt, a chipped seashell, a small book on philosophy, a long and thin chain of indeterminate origin, a rosary, a pair of white formal gentleman's gloves, and a small and rough knife with a darkened blade and a handle worn with age. He spread the items out on the table and invited Vivian to touch the items and begin her sorting. I should add that one of the items here is an item of great personal value to me, an item that I view as almost having a magical quality. Vivian looked dismayed. I have no chance in this game, she cried. These are all items I've never seen before. Do not be so logical or so competitive, mademoiselle. It will please me equally much if you should lose, he said to her happily. Now, look at each item and make your determination. Vivian and her mother whispered to each other. Her mother pointed at the book, and Vivian picked it up so they could both look at it. Then she put it down and reached for the pen. It was in a thin leather sleeve, so she pulled the pen out of the sleeve to have a closer look. Then she picked up the cufflinks and the ring, and so on until she had carefully seen every item. He watched her slender fingers at work as they touched each item, especially his items, and a heat went through him that was suddenly entirely incompatible with her mother sitting right there. Belatedly, he tried to think of something else. Vivian picked up the old button. "This one is yours," she told him. "It must be from your button box." "Very good, mademoiselle. That was an easy one that I threw in to boost your confidence," he said. She gave him an arched look. "You do not have very much faith in me, then," she said. "On the contrary, I have a great amount of faith in you, mademoiselle. You have correctly selected one item. There are 4 more that are mine." Her mother pointed in the direction of the rosary, so Vivian picked it up and moved it over to the button. Then Vivian picked up the white gloves and the chain of indeterminate origin. Of these she determined that the gloves were his and the chain was not. She determined that the seashell was not his. Between the book and the pen, she could not make up her mind, and so she kept them both in the pile of the items that she had identified as belonging to him. The old belt and the knife she had discarded. Now her pile had 4 items, and she had yet to reach a decision on the guitar pick, the cufflinks, and the gentleman's ring. She hesitated for a while, then put the book aside and picked up the ring. It was a heavy, ornate, old-fashioned man's ring. She looked at it, then looked at Gregory, and then confirmed it for the pile of his items. "I think these are yours," she told him. Her mother looked up at him expectantly. "The pen is not mine," he said. "The pen is not yours? Surely I thought the pen would be yours. That was done intentionally so that I would select it," she cried. "Well, all right, I do confess to this. But since I had given you the easy answer of the button, I figured that this would cancel that out," he said. "The gloves are not mine, but the ring is," he continued. "It was also a good choice between the ring and the cufflinks, because the cufflinks are also not mine. But besides the ring and the button, your other items are all incorrect. I would say, from your selections, that you see me as rather more refined than I perhaps truly am, which is flattering. Among the items you discarded are my other 3 items, the old belt, the knife, and the shell. So here, now you have all of my items in front of you. Do you know which one is my magical item? The item that I most particularly prize?" he asked her. Vivian looked at the items with a frown. "I would say that it is the ring, but something so obvious as a ring is rarely a magical item. Magical items tend to be more everyday objects," he finished for her. "I know this," she told him. She touched the remaining items again with great care, and there was a silence in the room. Her attention was entirely absorbed in the game, he could see. She was leaning over the table slightly, looking more closely. "All right. It is the shell," she said at last. "No, it is not the shell, but that is a very good guess. It is, in fact, this knife. I got it as a small boy from my older brother, who had recently received a better one. Must have been one of those ancient family hand-me-downs, judging from the shape that it is in. I look at this knife and remember my brother," he said. "It has helped me out of many a jam." Vivian looked over at him. I had no way to know this, because you have brought objects here from a part of your life that you have never agreed to speak about with us," she said quietly. Gregory heard the hurt in her voice, and it made him swallow hard. "You are right. I have not. Well, perhaps this is my way of sharing something from that time with you, without going all maudlin and remembering my grief." Madame Prevet interjected. "We would not wish to make you sad, ever," she said, "but sometimes it is difficult for us not to know any of your background or your kin. To be without any living relations, that must be very difficult." She picked up the knife. "This must indeed mean something very special to you, if you have had it since boyhood. Receipt of a boy's first knife is also an important milestone in life, I'm told. And how about the belt and the shell? Are there stories there also?" "The shell is from a day at the beach when I was a child. My younger sister gave it to me. The belt was mine as a boy. Again, handed down from several someones, I would say. The ring was my father's," he added. "And yet, the knife from your brother means more to you." Madame Prevet began, her statement left hanging in the air without an ending. "Yes, my father and I were never close," said Gregory. "He was a very old-fashioned, very conservative man. He believed that men should not display any inner emotion, and that young boys should not squander their minds on trash such as the Count of Monte Cristo. He once said to me that he thought the heavens had been most kind to him by making my brother the eldest and not me, because to have me inherit the family line would have been terrible. And now they are all gone, of course, my father having died even before the rest of them did, and I somehow find myself the only one left. And I know my father would have been unhappy about that." There was silence in the room. Vivian's eyes shimmered with what looked like tears. She also looked angry, but Gregory could not be sure why. Her mother reached a hand across the table and touched his jacket cuff. There, now. I'm sure he loved you very much, but every parent says foolish things at times. Try to remember the good moments with him now, and let this one go. I will go and put the kettle on for tea." And with these words she got up and went to the kitchen. "Why did you never tell me this?" asked Vivian in a near whisper. "Why do you only ever say anything about yourself if my mother is there?" I will be honest with you. I had not intended to say this much, beloved," he said softly back to her. Then he turned to look out of the window. "Were there any good moments with your father to think back on?" she asked him after a while. "No, not really. You know, that is one of the things that I discovered that I had in common with Wolf. His father had not been all that enamored of him either," said Gregory. "And since then, Wolf has become something of a father to you, am I right?" Vivian asked. She was smart and insightful, that much was for certain. "Yes, he has," admitted Gregory. "I would be nothing like I am today if it were not for Wolf. I would be a dissolute man with no job and no stake in the world, sitting around and squandering money while drinking myself senseless to forget my own inner hurts. I would still dress well, mind you, because even in my personal disintegration I would be a proud man, but everything else, the semblance of any structured living, would have simply disintegrated. He has coached me, taught me, sat with me and told me that I was the son he never had. I will not lie. It has meant a lot." Vivian reached out and put her hand on his arm, just below his elbow. "I think you are marvelous. I think any parent should have been incredibly proud to have a son like you. And whatever your father thought you would grow up to be like, he never saw you as you are now." "Thank God for that," muttered Gregory, looking away again. She was being kind to him. She did not know. How could she know his ongoing inner shame at what he had become in this life? "You are wrong," she said, pulling on his sleeve until he turned back to look at her. And there she was, boldly looking him in the eye now. "You are no expert on your own greatness. I am. I know there are things you have not told me about yourself, and I sense that you believe that some of them are things you are ashamed of, but that is not what matters. What matters is how you are to me and to others, what the world can see in you and in your actions, and I see great goodness. Can you believe me that I am right when I say this?" she asked him. She sounded so much older than him in this moment that he found it difficult to believe that she was a child of only 17. "It's going to be difficult to truly believe great good of myself, but I will try," he told her with a weak smile. And then her mother returned with the tea, and they changed the subject. Gregory had been right. Convincing Vivian's mother to let Vivian come out to her first ball was easy. Madame Prevet was so ecstatic that her daughter had the opportunity to attend a ball that she happily agreed to come and chaperone, and she even brought herself to overlook Gregory picking up the rental cost of Vivian's historic ball gown. It was not the purchase of a dress, after all. That would have been intolerable to social etiquette. He also assured Madame Prevet that he would bring the dress by 2 days in advance, so that she could approve of its neckline and make any necessary adjustments in the interests of good fit and modesty. He picked out a silver gown with dark blue accents for Vivian. The fabric gathered to a slim waist and trailing elaborately behind in a long train that had a loop at the end for Vivian to hook over her wrist. She was so slight of build that he knew she could not carry off pounds of heavy drapery, but this gown was of a light and flowing fabric, and had less upholstery and underlayered architecture than many of the other selections that the costume shop carried. Vivian had been tasked with finding her own elbow-length white gloves and suitable shoes. He delivered the dress in its fabric bag to their apartment, and then quickly made his exit before Vivian opened it. If she hated it, he may as well wait to hear her complaints when he also had the radiance of her to look at while wearing it to offset the complaining. He got his hair trimmed, then spent the Friday night out and taking care of himself so that there would be no complaints from her about his cold hands. Nor had there been any such complaints in a long time now. He had never been so self-disciplined before, he prided himself, although he knew he had to be careful not to consider it all too closely, or the underlying horror of his life would overwhelm him, and it made it both better and also much worse to think, it is for her, it is all for her. The evening of the ball came, and he scrubbed up in a hot bath, then climbed out, shaved carefully, and finally immersed himself in the other, well-familiar and almost hypnotic series of actions that he always undertook when readying himself for a formal occasion. stepping into his dress trousers, the splash of cologne, the dark socks, the buttoning up of his heavily starched, thick fabric, brilliantly white shirt, pulling a new collar out of its box, walking over to get his shoes and white bow tie and cufflinks, carefully combing pomade into his dark hair, and so forth. By the time he reached his arms into the armholes of his shiny vest and the sleeves of his spotless tailcoat, he had transformed himself into that elegant gentleman that he both could be for a while when he wanted to, and that was his favorite disguise. His white shirt against his pale skin made him gleam, he imagined, with some kind of impression of purity, such that people would look at him in this attire and think him to be a very upstanding member of society. He mentioned this fantasy to Wolf once, who had only sarcastically replied that, not to worry or feel like he was failing against people's expectations, no one could possibly be as holy as Gregory looked in formal evening wear. In his final preparation now, having ascertained that his attire and appearance were perfect in every respect, Gregory leaned into the mirror in his bathroom and scanned the corners of his eyes and mouth for wrinkles. But his face looked exactly like it had the last time that he had dressed up for an occasion, which was exactly like the time before that, and the time before that, to as far back as his memory stretched. Nothing ever changed on his surface. Only the inside of him still occasionally took new wounds. He sighed, shrugged, and then walked into his kitchen, where his icebox was serving as temporary cold storage for his lapel rose and the pinned flowers for Madame and Mademoiselle. He checked his notebook, discovered that he had forgotten his top hat and another box with a gift for Vivian in it, and went back to his bedroom to fetch them. Then he headed out. He had hired a car for the occasion and had arrived on time. He gave the driver Vivian's address, and then, when they reached the apartment building, he told the driver to wait while he gathered the ladies. He hurried swiftly in and up the dark steps and knocked on their door. Madame Prevet opened it, and he saw her take in the impression of him in his formal wear, and could see that, although she looked perhaps a bit faint, she did not disapprove. Behind her, Vivian moved into the room from her mother's bedroom alcove, where she had been getting ready, and the flawless sight of her took his breath away. The off-the-shoulder dress and its muted colors suited her perfectly and gathered around her pale skin in a way that was going to be hard to deal with her mother nearby. This was a young woman from the turn of the century, down to her elaborately pinned hair and the long white gloves that only further accentuated her already glorious arms. She was wearing the necklace that he had given her for Christmas. Otherwise she lacked all other adornments. Had his mother looked this beautiful when he had been a child? It was like falling violently and unexpectedly through a trapdoor, and straight into the past. Any thought that Gregory still held of Vivian as a child fled his mind at that moment. This woman was a queen. She also seemed not unaffected at the sight of him, he noticed in the next minute. Her mouth hung a bit slack, and there was a look of astonishment and awe about her face. "Do I please you, beloved?" he thought to himself. "All of these years of people staring at me were worth it, if in this moment I please you." His heart hammered in his chest. He looked at her and felt the almost irresistible urge to kneel before her like a knight of old before the lady of his heart. He wanted to kiss the hem of her gown and tell her to command him in any way that she saw fit. He felt himself turning into a puddle in front of her. Ye gods, the sight of her like this was more than his heart was ready for. He had underestimated her power over him, and now it was too late. He moved toward her like a man enchanted. "Vivian, you are fantastically beautiful," he said, trying, probably unsuccessfully, to hide the vulnerability in his voice. "That dress was made so that you could wear it. They may as well set it on fire after this. No one will ever be able to do it justice again." Vivian smiled, and it was the gracious smile of an older woman, a queen sure of her royal glory. "And you, Mr. Morgan, are the handsomest man ever to step upon the pavement of New Orleans. But you promised me a top hat?" "It is in the car, which is waiting below, by the way, so we should probably hurry. Here are flowers for you both to pin to your gowns. Oh, and I almost forgot to give you this, Mademoiselle Vivian." He opened the small box he had brought for her and pulled out a small, sparkly tiara. "May I?" he asked, and when she nodded her approval, he approached closer and set the combs of the tiara into the top of her elaborate hairstyle. Seeing the tines disappear in her hair suddenly filled him with a hungry, irrational desire to remove the tiara again, roughly throw all the pins out of her grand hairstyle, and let her hair fall down loose about her shoulders so that he could bury his fingers in it in place of these silly metal tines. He actually felt himself looking at her hair and gulping, and then he looked at her face and saw her flush as if he had actually done it. There was no doubt at all that she knew exactly what he had been thinking, and that their desires along this path were aligned. Somewhere to the left side of him, Madame Pravette clapped her hands, reminding Gregory that she existed. "Oh, Vivian, you look like a real princess. No princess in a storybook ever looked more beautiful. What do you say, Mr. Morgan? Is she not an unparalleled vision of loveliness?" "The urge to kneel awestruck before her is overwhelming," confessed Gregory. "But the sure knowledge that the driver of the car is not going to wait out in the street all night impels me to tear myself reluctantly away. Ladies, are you prepared to depart?" The ladies gathered their wraps, locked the apartment, and hurried downstairs, where Gregory helped them into the waiting car. Madame Pravette and Vivian chattered excitedly about the automobile, and it was obvious to Gregory that this was probably the single biggest thrill in Madame Pravette's last 12 months, if not longer. Vivian merely sat there smiling into the dark, and at one point told her mother that the car also turned into an attractive pumpkin after midnight. This made the driver laugh. When they arrived at the Roosevelt Hotel, the driver and Gregory helped the ladies out of the car. The driver stared at Vivian in open admiration, and Gregory had to wave the cash back and forth several times before his face to break the driver free of his trance. If every man they met was going to stare at her like this, it would be a long evening of working hard not to hit anyone, thought Gregory. And in that instant, he discovered that he had passed emotionally from respectful worshipper to possessive lover. As he offered her his dark-suited arm, Vivian gave Gregory an admiring glance and told him that, in his top hat, he met and possibly surpassed her expectations. Gregory smiled back, happy to know that she was taking this delight in him. He always loved this feeling, when he was about to stride into a glittering evening, feeling secure in the familiar darkness of his cutaway jacket, feeling his fingertips comfortably inside his white gloves. Then they stepped into the brilliant light of the hotel. He looked over at Vivian, twinkling beside him like a silver star, the beautiful spray of pinned flowers decorating her décolleté. And he forgot his jacket and his fingertips, forgot that he existed, as all sensations transmuted within him into undiluted awe of her. They left the lady's wraps and his top hat with the coat-check assistant and made their way up the stairs to the ballroom, where the fragrance of flowers and various perfumes intermingled. The musicians had begun playing, and couples were moving along the dance floor, painting a magical picture of days gone by. Vivian drew in her breath and tightened her hold on his arm. He put a gloved hand over her arm and raised his chin challengingly, daring any man in the room to look over at Vivian and imagine that he had a chance with her. Gregory would break his sorry neck. She was entirely his. Madame Prevet gave a soft sigh. "Oh, Vivian, this is something out of a dream. Can you even believe it?" They walked over to the chairs along the walls, and the ladies sat down, where they admired the dresses of the other ladies. The music ended, and the next piece was a waltz, so Gregory bowed low and asked Vivian for the favor of a dance. She blushed sweetly and nodded her head. "What is it that I am to do? Curtsy?" she asked uncertainly. "That sounds like it would be most charming to witness," replied Gregory with a smile. "Do you think you might?" he said in a low, flirtatious tone, as her mother was still in earshot. Vivian executed an elegant little curtsy that made it worth having asked for it, and then he offered her his arm so that he could escort her to the dance floor. He could hear her heart hammering beneath her ribs as he took her in his arms, leaned in for the briefest of moments to let her scent and her warmth temporarily overwhelm him, and then, far quicker than he would have believed possible, he felt himself reach almost the edge of what was manageable temptation for him, and he had to move his head away. He led her into the motion of the waltz, this circular flow through space that created its own natural, light-headed inebriation. And then after a while he reversed the turns in the other direction. Vivian never missed a beat. She did not dance like a girl who had just learned these steps one recent afternoon in a public park. She danced as if she had been born into royalty and had danced at similar events all her life. He was so proud of her in that moment, the way she could come into an event like this and blend in, so that no one would ever imagine that she was a poor seamstress who lived in what was practically one room with her mother, sleeping at night on a pull-out sofa bed, as she had once told him when he had asked her about it. She had transformed herself the way he had also, from whatever it was that he actually was, to this shiningly good and refined man in his impeccably tailored suit. The historic style of her dress was not the only aspect of costume, disguise, and pretending in this evening. She was, quite simply, marvelous. The waltz ended. Another one began. They danced that one as well, and then a third, and then Gregory reluctantly escorted Vivian back to her mother because he thought he had tired her. "You two look like something out of a motion picture or a fairy tale," exclaimed Madame Prevet. "Mr. Morgan, how did you teach her to dance so well in such a short amount of time?" "When it comes to graceful motion, there is very little that anyone need teach, mademoiselle," replied Gregory gallantly. Vivian sat down beside her mother to rest, and Gregory offered to go and investigate possible refreshments. He found where the refreshments were set up, and where the chaperones' area was, with its softer seating and low tables. "It so happens that they are out of punch at the moment, so all I could readily find was champagne," he said apologetically, when he returned with 2 champagne saucers. "Madame, may I offer you a glass? Mademoiselle, I appeal to your mother whether it would be appropriate to offer you champagne as well." Vivian's mother looked hesitant. "I don't know. Well, perhaps just a few sips." Vivian smiled, removed her gloves for extra prudence, and took the champagne saucer from him. He gazed down at her, breathlessly in love with her every gesture. "Who will fetch you a glass of champagne now, Mr. Morgan?" asked Vivian modestly between sips. "I confess, I already downed a glass before coming back with these," admitted Gregory. "Madame Prevet, would you like me to show you where the additional seating for the chaperones is? We can also walk over to where the additional refreshments are." The ladies placed their champagne saucers on the tray of a passing waiter, and then they wound their way through the other guests, and the evening really began. Gregory could not remember afterwards exactly how many dances they danced, or at which point Vivian's mother had gone off to recline on the sofas of the chaperones' lounge, but the evening turned into a splendid, magical time. The more they danced together, the more effortless it seemed, and the more he felt her anticipating his every gesture, familiar now with the exact length of his steps and the geometry of his movements. It seemed to him that she moved upon the urging of his thoughts, even before his body could indicate the lead to her, and this made him feel as if she had slipped into his very limbs, his very mind. The evening spun on, the room waltzing around them, while it seemed like they stood still in the middle of all of this delight. He wrote in his journal afterwards, "Between the twirling of the dance, and the champagne, and the music, and the sight of my own white-gloved hand holding yours, I was carried away into a dreamlike place where everything melted together into the color of pure happiness. My entire world came into that flawless sense of correctness and alignment that I always have before me as my ideal, yet that I so rarely reach. For an infinite moment, I held you within me, and your radiance glowed out of me like a flame in a lantern, and I lowered my eyes to somehow contain the brilliance." The warmth of the room and the close press of people on all sides eventually made them seek out the coolness of the night air out in front of the hotel. She stood before him, her tiara catching a million sparkles in the lamplight, the silver of her gown gleaming against the darkness, and he felt his heart climb into his throat. "Vivian," he said softly, "do you remember the night at the Columns Hotel?" She nodded up at him. "You asked me what it was that I saw in you. Well, I have been thinking on that since then, and now I think I know. I see a recognizable piece of myself. It is something that makes you familiar to me, a part of me somehow. He caught her hand with his fingers, and then moved his other hand up to the top of her white glove by her elbow. With his gloved fingers, he pushed her glove down her arm, revealing her soft skin to him, frustratingly without his being able to slide his bare fingertips along it. Her heart immediately began to dance wildly for him, going straight to his head, like a shot of whiskey downed in a single gulp. He pulled her glove carefully off of each of her fingertips, and then eased her hand out of it, shocking himself at how much like undressing her entirely this simple act had become. Then he took her hand in his gloved fingers, bowed over it, and reverentially kissed it. He looked up at her, saw her dark eyes watching him, suddenly knew what he wanted to say, only suddenly finding that it was much, much harder to make the words come out of his mouth than he would have believed possible. "Vivian," he began. "Vivi, please forgive me, but you must know that I do love you with all my heart." Her face went pale, and her hand trembled as his words found their way to her heart. "Vivi, do you understand? Do you understand how I love you?" he asked her. His voice sounded hoarse to his own ears. I know there are many different kinds of love," she began. "Vivi, I love you like no one has ever loved you, and like no one will ever love you again. I love you like you are a part of me, and I have no choice in the matter. The fate sent you to me to love, and I must love you, and I do. Sometimes I wondered why I even lingered on this miserable earth as long as I have, and now I think for certain that it was to meet you. Beloved, oh my beloved." He looked down at her lips and wondered what would happen if he kissed them right this instant. Would the world really come to an end? Would the heavens open and some kind of immediate punishment for transgression overcome them? Very reluctantly, he settled for placing a kiss on the soft skin at her temple, from where her hair was now swept up in her formal hairstyle, where her skin was so soft and irresistible. He felt a current move through her as his lips touched against her skin. "Gregory, I love you too. I love you too," she whispered tremulously, and when he pulled back he could see that she had closed her eyes as strong emotions swept over her. He struggled with himself to keep from putting his arms about her, but he stepped in very, very close. "I may have the worst memory that anyone ever had, but I swear to you that I will remember this moment for the rest of my life, for as long as I remember anything at all," he said to her in a low voice. "I want to be yours," she said to him in a voice so quiet that only he could hear it. "Make me yours." "You are mine," he said, trembling inside at her words. "No matter how it may ever seem, or what anyone else may say, never believe otherwise." He stepped back slightly, waited for her eyes to reopen, and then he returned her glove to her. "It is a shame to cover up your beautiful hand and arm, but at the same time, there will be pleasure in watching you put it back on," he said huskily, then immediately wondered if this was an appropriate sentiment to share with a very young girl. Probably it wasn't. That must be what made saying it feel so sinfully delicious. She took the glove from him, held his gaze, and slowly put her hand back in it. The glove moved up her arm again, taking inch after inch of her skin away out of his sight. It seemed a terrible pity, until his eyes moved higher, and took in her still bare upper arm, her décolleté with his necklace gleaming there against her skin, and her small, delicate shoulder, its perfect color contrasting with the brilliant white of the glove. Yes, I am staring at you, beloved, because the sight of you is overwhelming me, and I cannot make myself look away, he thought. It was only after a few difficult moments that he brought himself to say, "We should go inside and pay a visit to your mother, who may be wondering where we have gone." They walked back inside and up to the ballroom, and then to the chaperone's lounge. Vivian's mother was seated in the lounge on a small sofa and speaking with another woman. "Oh, Vivian, good that you are here," cried her mother. "This fine lady has just been telling me that they have a fortune-teller in the hallway down beyond the refreshments area, as a nod to the spiritualist movement of the turn of the century. What fun! You should go and have your fortune told." Gregory looked doubtfully at Vivian. "Would such a thing amuse you?" he asked skeptically. "On an evening like tonight it might," replied Vivian happily, still glowing from their conversation outside in a way that her mother had to have noticed. "Very well, I will escort you there," he said. It was not difficult finding the fortune-teller's small table because it had a line of girls and couples about 25 people deep in front of it. "Are you sure you want to stand in this line?" he asked Vivian. "Because if you stand here, I can fairly accurately predict that your future will involve about 3/4 of an hour of waiting." "Well, we could wait for a bit, perhaps, and see how fast the line moves," said Vivian. "I've never had my fortune read." "And neither have I, mainly because it is utter rubbish," he told her. "Well, look, if you wish to stand here for a bit, I will stop in at the gents. Please do what I would do and shoo off any unwanted admirers while I'm gone for these few moments, will you?" He nodded. She smiled up at him, and then he headed off. As he returned, he could see that she had moved up perhaps 1 foot further along the hallway. "Well, it seems that we still have a while ahead of us. I think this will take up the balance of our evening, which is all right by me if it is all right by you," he told her. She was thoughtful for a moment, then was about to speak, but he never got to find out what she had planned to say, because just at that moment there was a movement of people in the front of the line, and the people up ahead of them began turning around to look at them. Gregory looked through the parting crowd to see what the cause for the commotion was. Up ahead at the table, the dark-skinned old woman and her assistant who were reading the fortunes had both stood up, and the older woman was pointing. Was she pointing at them? How odd! She did not know them at all. Why would she be pointing at them? The word began to pass down along the line, and then finally the girls just ahead of them told Vivian that the gypsy fortune-teller was asking for the girl in the blue and silver dress and her partner to come forward. Vivian looked up at Gregory. "What could this possibly mean?" she asked him. "I haven't the slightest idea. Maybe she has impossibly sharp ears and heard me referencing earlier to her craft as rubbish," he suggested. They walked forward together, people surprised but letting them pass. In a few strides, they were at the fortune-teller's table, where the fortune-teller and her assistant had sat back down. The small table had a black tablecloth, a crystal ball, and cards set out on it. "Pardon me," Vivian began, "but did you call me forward? To read my fortune?" The old woman gave her a strange look, her eyes wrinkling at the corners in her old face. "No, not you," said the old woman in a heavy accent. "Him. But I cannot say, 'Men in black come here,' because all men are in black." She looked up at Gregory, Gregory felt a sharp pang of uneasiness come over him. "No, there's a misunderstanding. I do not wish to get my fortune read. In fact, I wish to know nothing whatsoever about my fortune or my future." The old woman frowned and looked at Vivian. "Is he with you?" she asked. "Yes, began Vivian, but the old woman ignored her. "No!" interjected the old woman vehemently. "Not with you," she said. "Now see here," began Gregory, getting upset now. The old woman put up a hand to silence him, looking up at him with a deep frown and thinking. "Maybe I make a mistake. Here, I read your palm." She reached out her hand. "No, I said I do not want," began Gregory. "Give your hand!" commanded the old woman loudly, and something about her tone made him think it would all be over quicker and with less of a scene than if he resisted. He lifted up his hand, and the old woman took hold of his fingers and peered at his open palm. She only looked at it for a second, and then dropped his hand as if she had picked up burning coals. "Ah!" she cried, fear and horror filling her voice. "Not safe! You run, girl!" she shouted at Vivian. Things went very quickly after that. The old woman started screaming at Gregory and pointing for him to go. She and her assistant began fearfully and rapidly speaking to each other and packing up the cards, the crystal ball, the tablecloth, and finally the small table itself, all with the deft speed of people accustomed to moving along quickly to avoid sudden dangers such as the police. Vivian's mouth was hanging open in shock. The old woman had grabbed a small bag, shoved the crystal ball and cards into it, and began fleeing down the hall, leaving her assistant to struggle behind with the small table and its tablecloth. Their fellow partygoers, who had already spent a considerable time in line, waiting for their fortunes to be read, started to jostle each other. "What is this? Oh, we waited for so long already. What did they do to upset her?" "Is it something we said?" Vivian asked Gregory, her face white as a sheet. "No, beloved," he said to her, suddenly feeling exhausted. "Wolf, you were right. You were right. How did I ever imagine that the dream could last?" "Let's get out of here before this angry crowd comes after us," he said to her. He reached for her gloved hand with his now bare hand, and he pulled her along with him back down the hallway. Together they hurried to the lobby, where Gregory looked at the clock and said it was just about time anyways to call for the car. He asked for the hotel staff to put through the request, and then he looked down at Vivian. She looked frightened. "Why did the old woman say you are not with me? Or did she mean I should not be with you? Am I not safe with you? What did she see in your palm? Do you know what she saw in your palm?" Vivian asked him with agitation. "Yes, I know what she saw," he said, surprising himself that he said it. "Tell me, are you afraid of me, Vivian? Do you think I would ever hurt you?" He looked into her eyes. "No, I do not think you would hurt me. No, never," she told him. "Would you ever hurt me?" "No, I would not hurt you. How could I ever hurt you? I would rather die than hurt you, or even see you hurt in any way," he insisted. "Then what did she see in your palm? What are you keeping from me?" she asked him, her voice rising in panic. "Shh, Vivi, lower your voice. Everything is all right. You know that I am a bit odd, perhaps, have some quirky habits, and undoubtedly she could sense that too. She does not know me, and so she imagines perhaps that I am like other unusual men, and I must be some kind of danger to you. But you do know me. My quirks do not make me completely insane or psychopathic. I have been alone with you on numerous occasions. Have I ever put you at risk in any way? And I did not tell you that I loved you tonight because I somehow take that lightly. I feel that I have a holy obligation toward you as a result of this love, this connection. He took a deep breath. I'm not about to defend myself to some crazy gypsy or her furniture carrier, but I am prepared to stand by my statement to you, and to prove to you that my heart is as my words tonight have indicated. But I need your help now, Vivi. Oh, can you please not breathe a word of this to your mother? It would be for me like trying to explain to her why my kitchen cabinets are empty, which is to say, difficult, and I'm not sure if she would understand. And I don't want to lose you. I feel so terrible to make this request of you, and I know that I really have no right to ask it of you. But can you keep this between us? She looked at him with her eyes wide for a moment, and then nodded. I trust you, Gregory, she said. Do not let me down. They hurried up to find Madame Prevet, who was surprised to see that the evening was already over, but Gregory explained to her that the car had come for them. The ladies gathered their wraps. Gregory grabbed his top hat, and they walked through the lobby and out of the hotel. He helped the ladies into the car, and then closed the door and joined the driver in the front. What an unusual thing I heard, said Madame Prevet. It appears that there was a to-do with the fortune-teller. She packed up her things and left midway through reading someone's fortune. Well, that is gypsies for you. How unprofessional. Many people were apparently upset that they had waited and waited, only to have her pack up and run out on them. Did you get your fortune read before she disappeared? There was a pause, and then Vivian quietly said, No, the line was too long, so we decided against waiting in it. Oh, you sound dejected, Vivian. Did you not enjoy the rest of your evening? Asked her mother. On the contrary, I had a marvelous evening, Mother, replied Vivian. I'm tired now, but it was so wonderful. I shall never, ever forget it. Gregory sighed with relief and looked out the window. It was not until he returned home that he realized he had meant to give Vivian the rose from his buttonhole, but in the unexpected excitement of the end of their evening, he had entirely forgotten.